Welcome to the Freddie Kissoon Show. Bring it!
Let me ask you this question. I would like to ask the AG to propose legislation for what we call small claims court. There are lots of poor people, to an example you just gave, that they have issues with others and sometimes with large firms, but the lawyer fee is greater than the fee you're claiming.
It is their right.
Yes.
A right, the right that someone has. All of our rights exist in context.
What is the context of a second medical opinion?
Because you're disrespecting the process.
No.
Jesus, this is common sense, man.
Any situation which you see in the day, you just dealing with Afro-Guyanese issues. If one, you can't bring and pull the leaders of the African community together, you're failing. And if two, you can't put forward a future, a blueprint, and a plan for African Guyanese, you're failing as well.
Pleasant Friday evening to you. This is the Freddie Kissoon Show, coming to you from the home of someone I have known for more than 50 years, Dr. Mark Kirton. We're in his living room and we are going to discuss what is his expertise for the past 40 years. Sitting next to him is well-known expert also in Caribbean diplomacy, Neville Bissember. You cannot want two more profound experts to speak on international relations. Dr. Mark Kirton has taught international relations for decades at the University of Guyana, University of the West Indies. Neville Bissember is one of the longest serving foreign service officers in Guyana, maybe the region. Then, when he retired, he worked as an advisor to the Secretary General of CARICOM. He's currently a lecturer in international relations at the master level at the University of Guyana. Gentlemen, as usual, but I don't want to shake your hand. You just a recurring face on this program. I have to reach over to my friend that I've known more than 50 years. Neville, thanks for always responding to our request. Mark, as usual, my friend for so long. Now, Mark and Neville, I think an international relations scholar will not object to one saying, it's a crazy world we're living in. But Mark, you did your doctorate in Latin American studies. So let's talk about the abduction of Maduro, the threat to Colombia, Nicaragua. What is the shape to come?
Well, Freddie, thanks for coming to my humble abode. When one...
Let me cut you. I wonder if our cameraman could focus on someone I have known as long as I've known you, Mark, your dear departed wife. The camera can get that?
Wow.
Blessed memory, Jerry.
Freddie?
Yes.
Yes, my dear wife of blessed memory is perhaps looking down on us and looking at this word disorder, as I would want to call it now. When you ask me about Latin America in some ways, but I think that globally, I'm one who believes in a rules-based world order. And what we're seeing is a departure from that. As you know, as an international relations scholar, the realist perspective on international relations talks about power, the issue of self-interest in some ways. Kenneth Waltz and Morgenthau and so on.
So the textbooks we had to read.
Right. We used to read those in those days. Looked at a level of anarchy in the absence of any form of global governance in some way. So we've seen that come back in this region at this stage. Now, a respect for international law has waned we see where, for example, in the case of Venezuela and Guyana, since the 1960s, we've seen significant violations of international law in relation to the spurious claim on Guyana's territory. From the 1960s, we saw Venezuela taking our portion of Ancofo Island, which was given as part of the arbitral war in 1899. And we go right up. We've had incursions, we've had aggression against our fishermen. As a matter of fact, as late as 2025, we've had our soldiers being attacked by armed Venezuelans. We see where, remember, there's a seismic survey ship seized in 2013. I think it's called it, I can't remember the name right now. And there have been several incidents, including most recently, the promulgation, if I call it that, of a state called Guyana Essequibo, and it be placed on the map of Venezuela. So those have been significant reversals, to my mind, of the principles and practices of international law, and directly contravening the Charter of the United Nations. It didn't finish there, because in 2025, we saw that the United States itself came into this region purportedly to in a sense, have a campaign against drug traffickers and bombing boats in international waters in contravention of international law. So here we have, and I believe you can't cherry pick international law. If you're looking at it, you have to look at the structure of it and recognize that violations across states and everything else. So what we find in Venezuela now, I mean, we fast forward to the capture of Mr. Maduro 2 weeks ago almost, and we see where we have an interim president. So I don't know. Some people say this is a what do you call it? Reversal of the order in the United States in Venezuela. But to me, with Delcy Rodriguez as interim president, it's not a decapitation of the regime or regime change, because here we see, and I've noticed that Delcy Rodriguez stood behind a map with Guyana Essequibo, and she wore a lapel pin, the brooch, some people call it, with that state still there. And that, to my mind, if you ask about a potential impact on the region of Guyana, I think that's one. I think what we need to do in any conversation with countries like the United States, talk about the reversal of that kind of approach and the return to a globally accepted map of Guyana with all its 83,000 square miles. And that is, I believe, a low-hanging fruit, if one could call it that, for Guyana to, in its conversations with the United States and others, talk about a return to an understanding quite clearly that Guyana, that is globally recognized, must continue to be that way. Additionally, I believe that we have to recognize that the controversy and the claim, the spurious claim by Venezuela, is at the level of the International Court of Justice. And therefore, that also means the non-violation or the acceptance of international law, and to ensure that Venezuela is prepared to live with the judgments of the ICJ when it's given. So we have a set of issues that are emerging not only for Guyana, and I will add that for the region, we see the small states. Just yesterday, I saw where there was a meeting of the heads of government of the OECS, and they talked about, problems related to energy security, because Petro-Caribbean, I think, is over. So one of my, I would say, recommendations is that consideration be given by Guyana and others for the introduction of Petro-Caricom, where we can use some of the oil of Guyana, some that will soon come out of Suriname in 2027, 28, I hear, with the refinery facility of Trinidad and Tobago, although Trinidad and Tobago has been an outlier in relation to the issue with Venezuela and the United States. But I think those things are important, to my mind, for consideration as we go forward in this region.
Neville, the capture of Maduro.
Well, my colleague, Dr. Kirton, covered
He said the capture, why not abduction?
quite a lot of wrong. I think I saw a note, the BBC issued an instruction to tell the journalists not to refer to kidnapping, because kidnapping is a crime. They must talk about seizure or something like that. Just to clarify, I was an advisor to the Secretary General before I retired.
Okay.
And I retired, after I retired, I joined the faculty and I teach international law, sir, not international relations. So I hope anybody might turn up to
You're
international
teaching
relations
you
class.
teach
Looking
in the
for me.
program of international.
No, I'm in the law department anyway. So
Okay.
I teach
No,
human rights law
Mark, I
and
thought-
constitution.
No, but
I thought it was
he
in-
taught a course
In the
in master's
beginning,
program.
in the very beginning.
What is it called?
Strategic Development Studies. Yeah. You started out, you mentioned a phrase as a confusing word or something like that. You used the term. And I think Mark gave some ideas. You know, I look in the dictionary the other day for Venezuela. When I look, it said, see confusion. When I look and see confusion, it said, see Venezuela. But I don't understand what is going on in Venezuela. There are 3 presidents of Venezuela. Mr. Trump says he's the president.
Yeah.
The lady says she's the interim president. And they got a man stand up in New York in the courtroom saying, I'm the president of Venezuela. I don't understand what now. Right? And as Mark says, this is not regime change. He just took Obama and left most of the regime, including some people who were sanctioned and wanted by that same court in America for similar crimes, and they're still allowed to stay. So we really, you said confused or whatever it is. He mentioned the role of international law, not only for our purposes, but generally. I saw the 47th president of the United States there, they said, you don't need international law. The journalist asked him if there's any check on what he's doing. He said the only check is his morality, and he's a very moral person. Well, I don't understand. And if you try to make sense out of this thing, I see 2 days ago, none other than the distinguished Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, who's a senior counsel, a senior colleague of mine, said that he is taking external advice and everything that was done off the shores of Venezuela was done according to international law. He said he went outside the Attorney General's chambers and he sought expert international advice. I don't know where he got that advice from. But I have tried to put the pieces together. And we start off by saying we put in some boats in the water. Contrary to all the rules of innocent passage, you can't put boats in people's waters just so. They claimed there was a threat against the United States. I don't know how some boats off the shores of Venezuela could constitute a threat against the United States. But they unilaterally determined there was a threat. Right? And there's certain rules, as Dr. Kirton said, about the rules of international law. If there is a threat, you have the right to self-defense. It must be proportionate and it must be necessary. So we don't know what was the threat, and we don't know if the retaliation was appropriate. This thing started out as a war against narco traffickers. I learned something, I was looking, it said it's a non-international armed conflict. So people said, well, how could it be non-international? Because it is taking place abroad, outside of America. But it means non-international meaning not with a state, right? Not a nation. The war was being waged against drug traffickers. So that's a non-international armed conflict. That's what it started out as. Blowing people up in the waters without due process because of drugs. 2 weekends ago, they launched an invasion against a sovereign country. So it's no longer a non-international armed conflict, because it's a country, it's a nation that's involved. So the nature of the operation changed. Originally, it was a war against drug traffickers. Then you go and invade a sovereign country, and you hear all of a sudden oil. If the purpose of this thing was oil, why were you blowing up poor innocent citizens in the waters all along in the name of narco trafficking? What was the threat? Narco trafficking? Maduro? We don't know. And as I said, you remove Mr. Maduro, but you leave the administration in place. So, to come back to your phrase about confusion, we're really in a confused state. I don't know how we're going to proceed. On the Saturday morning, Mr. Trump was asked, who running Venezuela? He said, we running Venezuela. He said, the three gentlemen stand up behind me. I'm going to be running Venezuela. That's Stephen Miller, his advisor. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. He texted Secretary of Defense. I saw Jane Saki did a program 2 nights ago where they've since interviewed each of those three gentlemen individually. Stephen Miller said, it's Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio said, it's a military operation. Mr. Exit said, the president determined the policy. We don't know who's running the country. In the meantime, in the initial stage, Jesse Rodriguez said, Maduro is the only president of Venezuela. He must come back. Next day, she said, she's willing to work with the U.S. Now, she see this morning, now she said, she's willing to take the flag of Venezuela to walk all the way to Washington to see Mr. Trump. It's the lady who's also on the indictment. And so you wonder about this rules-based order and what the situation is, because me, personally, I'm not quite sure if you ask me what's going to happen down the road. The gentleman said he's going to take over the oil industry and they're going to take charge of the oil. The oil executive met with him last week, and none other than Mr. William Woods, the man in charge, the executive of Exxon. He said Venezuela is uninvestable. Mr. Trump has no resources to go and develop the oil industry in Venezuela. That has to come from the private sector. So he needs a partnership between the private sector oil companies and the government. And again, you see some disconnect. So I would like to wait a little and see what happens next. We don't know how much control Ms. Rodriguez has over that country, whether in fact if she leaves and travels to Washington, whether the regime will stay in place. And then, as Mark says, for us in the Caribbean, smaller states, I see Sir Ronald put out a piece yesterday saying one of the elements that was missing in the last 2 weeks was a common response, a collective CARICOM response to this series of events. As you said, the OECS met 2 days ago. But there was nothing that could have stopped the CARICOM from calling an emergency summit in the past days already to sit and discuss these things. We have the technology now to try to fashion a way forward. But you got Trinidad and Tobago going in one direction, Guyana going in a slightly different direction, and then, I don't know if silence is consent. They're not hearing anything from a lot of people. And if you go further afield, like Cuba, Colombia, Greenland, all of those are situations where the rules of party no longer apply. So we're in a state of, as you said, confusion. And for small countries like us, we have a more than passing interest because of the oil industry here and because of US interests in our oil industry. So we have to be a little circumspect. But as a small country, a small developing country, we share similar concerns with not only Trinidad and Tobago, but the OECS. Mark's idea about the Petro CARICOM might be one way of bringing that unity back together that is missing, where you get different countries operating with a common purpose rather than appearing to be on their own individual paths. So the jury is still out. Mr. Trump has 2 more years, no? Before his term comes, and then a lot can happen in that period.
2.5.
2.5. A lot can happen in that period. The midterms are coming up. There's some internal problems in the United States. Some people argue that foreign policy is an extension of the national policy. You see a lot of things going on in America. People's human rights being violated, arrest and detention of people, arbitrary arrests, not unlike what had been happening up here with the boats off Venezuela. I don't know if we want to go so far as to draw a connection, but there's also a domestic constituency in America that the president needs to be listening to. I see some statistics. Most people, the polls say they're unhappy with how he handled the Venezuela situation. A lot of people don't mind Maduro being removed because he's a bad guy. But then look at the consequences for the people of Venezuela, the economy of Venezuela, and for us in the Caribbean. So a lot of moving parts still, and I think we gotta wait, tread cautiously, be circumspect, we in particular, because of our oil industry and the West interest in our oil resources.
I think both of you are fairly well versed in CARICOM's affair, CARICOM's history, the shape of CARICOM over the past 40, 50 years. The biggest quarrel in CARICOM was the 1983, was the revolution in Grenada and how CARICOM should approach it. Junior Charles of Dominica was very anti Maurice Bishop, and then came the invasion. Would you say this thing with Kamala Bissessar, in which she said Trinidad, CARICOM is no I want to get it right, I think she said CARICOM is not helpful to Trinidad or something like that.
She's no longer a reliable partner.
Right, it's a reliable partner. Mark, and then
Well, I would say that over the years, I mean, CARICOM.
could it get worse?
Well, I hope it gets better because, in my view, as small states, if we don't, nobody else is looking out for CARICOM. I think we have to have that level of engagement once again. That would bring a sense of understanding that the small states, almost alone in this wide backyard, as they call it, but US backyard, we have to do a few things. First of all, ensuring that we go back, or we get back somehow, to that united kind of approach that used to characterize the region in the early CARICOM days. I think there was a fusion of ideas, of convergence of interests and so on, that were necessary, and also they were there, and there was an understanding, a movement towards some form of CARICOM identity and all that. I believe that what we've seen recently, a level of acrimony, a level of fragmentation that has to be addressed. I mean, as small states, we have to recognize that yes, there are national interests, but I think there are certain issues, including regional security, and where we go as a sovereign people. And you know, my favorite thing, I agree that CARICOM is now is a community of sovereign states. I think it should be transferred to a sovereign community of states. One set of shared sovereignty. Now, so you can't get away from the fact that we are in close proximity to the United States. It's a large power. It will be there, you know, the realist theory and practice, so to speak. But at the same time, I believe that we have to attempt to move away from that unifocal arrangement, diversify linkages. And I think, once again, in the hemisphere, we have to look at countries like Brazil, Mexico. We have to look at also away from the region, maybe look to see what kind of strategic interests that could be satisfied by the BRICS. And so you move from that sole dependent engagement, so to speak, to a more pragmatic kind of approach, you know, responsible pragmatism, as I like to call it sometimes, and it's been said by some Latin American states as a policy platform. Responsible pragmatism. Look at it. Look to see where some of your interests, strategic, could be satisfied by linkages with the United States. For example, in regional security, we don't have enough as a resource base across the region to be able to deal with some of the issues of security. We should broaden, for example, the RSS, regional security system. Bring all the states as members of the regional security system. Help us out in some of those areas that we're weak in. We can look to diversify trade, for example. Stronger linkages with Latin America, with India. And you know, China's footprint is increasing. And so therefore, I think all of those interests that I think are regional in scope could be addressed in this changing environment?
I think the Grenada thing, Freddie, you know, I do not know for sure. They argue that Governor General Schoon had invited the Americans to come in. There's another view that the letter was manufactured after the fact to justify the invasion. And also, some CARICOM states were supportive of it.
Yeah.
And there's a ideological Cold War background to that. I don't know if you fast forward now to the current situation. Yeah, Mr. Maduro is a socialist, but I don't think ideology had so much to play as was the case with Grenada. And certainly there was nobody who was encouraging the United States to invade Venezuela, as was the case in Grenada. So the situations are not necessarily the same. For the region, you know, people say, Mark likes to use the term about fragmentation. And I say to him, it's people exercising their sovereignty, including Madam Bissember, but I think the way how she did it was a little over-exuberant. Because, as you said, the national interest and the regional interest. And, of course, the treaty allows for that. We're supposed to coordinate our foreign policy as far as practical. Just like the European Union, when they issued sanctions against Russia, they said they must stop buying the oil. One or two countries like Germany, industrial countries that rely on Russian oil said, excuse me, we can't go along with that. And they were allowed to opt out. And nobody involved and said fragmentation or confusion. They were allowed to do that. Why we not allowed to do that? If they believe the manner in which the dear lady expressed herself. Right? She could just have, like when the statement was issued, it said she not resolve the position. That's all. But some of the dialogue and the rhetoric that has come out has been unfortunate. I think Prime Minister Brown himself pointed out to his colleague in Trinidad and Tobago that CARICOM is in fact a reliable partner in the economic sphere. And the data will show that Trinidad and Tobago is the highest beneficiary from the single market and economy. I don't know if she didn't remember that at the time. We focused in on a political issue about regime change and sovereignty and narco trafficking and zone of peace. But there's an economic side to whether your counterparts in CARICOM are reliable or not. And the record will show we have been reliable on the economic front. So hopefully that will work itself out. Going forward, how is it that we must relate to the great United States now when, as we say, some of the rules are out of the window? It seems as if Mr. Trump has a certain mindset, game plan of action, which is proceeding unchecked. Most of the criticism has been muted. And so as small states, we have to be aware of that. We see moves now with visa diplomacy. We see moves now with migration diplomacy. Different elements that member states have to respond to. How do you respond to that?
Which is not coercive diplomacy.
Well, I will put all of them together. It's a form of coercion, right? But there's a certain irony here. You know? People are complaining that the US is restricting immigration, not for non-immigrant visas, for permanent residents, because you don't want to become a charge on the public purse, and there's statistics to show how much CARICOM nationals depend on subventions in America. The same CARICOM countries who are enthusiastic about a free movement regime in CARICOM, including Dominica, which is one of the four that has gone ahead. If you read the Shanik Marie case, the CCJ said, yes, free movement, but you can't become a charge on the public purse. Exactly the same thing. Countries always guard their sovereignty on the basis of national security and the economic or fiduciary consideration. The same conditions that the US has imposed as a result of which they're restricting immigration into the US, it's the same thing that we would insist on here. And the CCJ has said you can insist on. If Ms. Marie was going to become a charge on the public purse, or if she was a threat to Barbados national security, the immigration people would have been within their right to refuse her entry. She was neither. It's the same kind of thing, but people guard their sovereignty the same way. The difference is, of course, is the power with which the United States brings to the table. Mark mentions countervailing forces, Brazil, which is an important country in the region, and looking towards non-traditional partners, the Indians, the Chinas, to see how we could, as it is, balance or look in another direction, act as a counterfoil, I don't know what you want to call it, but rather than putting all the eggs in one basket with the US, maybe we look in different directions, bearing in mind all the time that as small states, we need to be alive to some of these realities. Without I'm saying bending over backwards or anything, but in a situation where the rules-based system doesn't seem to be operating anymore. You know, Mr. Trump invaded Venezuela. This video was an intervention to kidnap Mr. Maduro. How different is that from what Mr. Putin is doing in Ukraine, to invade that country and seizing territory? In this case, it's a personality. But it's the same principle. Non-intervention in internal affairs is a principle in international. And both of them have violated that principle. So if that is something that is coming out to the fore, the gentleman making a statement about Greenland, I think he wanted to go after Colombia, but the Colombian president met. Cuba, of course, is the unknown quantity. Because if you restrict oil from Venezuela going to Cuba, where else is Cuba going to get the oil from? Can't get it from Russia all the way over so now because of the embargo and the pollution the waters. So things are changing, and we need to fit ourselves as small states within that environment. That's why I think one of the things Mark pointed out is looking in other directions.
Strategic global repositioning is one potential.
Yeah.
We have to look as a region, ensure that we coordinate the kind of positions that could really coalesce with all of our national and regional interests, move beyond that narrow focus, and look to the global south broadly, but also to look to some of those countries, and Neville supposedly, look to some of those states.
You see,
That have, I think that could not pick up the slack, but could have a different type of approach in relation to this.
concurrent or something.
Yes,
Because if you look at the first Trump administration, the Trump administration has never dealt with CARICOM as a group. Remember the Mar-a-Lago meeting, the cherry picking, some heads of state were selected to go meet with the gentleman at Mar-a-Lago. This time around, as I understand it, we asked for a meeting. I don't think the Trump administration deals with CARICOM as a collective. So we have to find some space, make that some kind of operational approach for us to be speaking to the folks in Washington to understand that there are different moving parts within the community, but we all have common focuses involved. And what I think Ron Sanders was saying, is that what we see in the past couple of weeks, what individual positions emerging, will probably in the long term do us no good.
Yeah.
So the order we get that collective approach going. I know the CARICOM summit is the next 2 months, at the end of February. I would have thought that is too long, and they could have had, as I said, an emergency meeting already, a one-item agenda, situation in the Caribbean, or I don't know, organizing for development of the region or something, a one-item agenda, and have a full discussion amongst themselves if they want. Sometimes they have meeting what they call a caucus, and they have a good, warm discussion to try and chart the way forward rather than doing the individual routes. The fragmented route.
You both have advocated diversification in Caribbean's international relations. But we, between the lines, when Mark Rubio was here, we didn't know he was highway, it wasn't built by the Chinese. But there was this subterranean thing about him, about the Chinese. If you're going to diversify, and the Chinese is obviously the prospects, it's a superpower, it's extremely rich, it reaches out to the global south. Suppose the United States seem to be more obsessed with the challenge China poses to its global hegemony than any other country. If you take Mark Rubio's emanation when he was here, suppose the Americans are saying, we don't want you to go in that direction. Stay away from China. What does a country like Guyana and other CARICOM states do? Motivate.
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is ensure that these disagreements, not fragmentation, let me call them disagreements, within the region are reduced or eliminated. First thing, to my mind, has to have CARICOM unity to ensure that we aren't talking at individual levels anymore for them to cherry picking. You come up with a regional strategy, engaging the people, ensuring the people and governments. And then you have a demarche in Washington saying, hey, these are some of our concerns. I don't think, even with the Trump administration being transactionalist and all that, I don't think that they would back off from a regional approach that is sturdy, robust enough to come up with new directions in which the relationship with the US will go. Yes, there's I think, a competition for power in the hemisphere, of course. As you can see, the Chinese economic footprint increasing. The US, I believe, turns its glance away from the region for a while, and the space, both geopolitical and otherwise, was picked up by countries like China, and so they're embedded in some countries, and of some of the, well, I don't want to call them deals, but some of the agreements they've made, some of the interest rates are more competitive than the US, and therefore countries are falling in, for example, to the Belt and Road initiatives, which provide the kind of operational and maybe strategic engagements with countries in this region like China, which brings about some movement that assists the people of the region. So if we coalesce on some of those issues and approach the US, I don't think although there's competition for influence, I don't think the US would want to just arbitrarily continue to bulldoze this region.
Neville, Trump is that rational and logical and sensitive?
Some people feel there might be some hope with some of the folks that he surrounds himself with, but even that we're not sure when you look at the positions that are being taken. But to pick up on your point, it was Mr. Biden, I believe, some years ago, who had said, I'm paraphrasing now, that he dedicated himself to make sure that China does not become the #1 economy in the globe by 2030 or something like that. The US was hell-bent on that. And if you look through the region, you got the airport, you got the bridge, you got some number of infrastructure projects here, Trinidad, Queens Hall, Jamaica, the highway from Montego Bay to Kingston. As Mark says, the Chinese footprint is there throughout. So, in Guyana we said, people bad-minded. You can't be telling me, don't tie bundle with the Chinese. And then when you say, okay, come build an airport for me, come build a road for me, you're not doing it. The Chinese are doing it. The US, by, as Mark says, looking away or being distracted by other things, nature borders a vacuum, the Chinese took advantage of that. They have a lot of money, they have resources, their human rights requirements are very different. Chinese don't issue no human rights report for nobody. They don't lend you the money.
Yeah, they keep it right.
They lend you the money, they want access to the resources, you get an arrangement that is profitable for them commercially, fine. Don't come and tell you about how much trafficking in persons, how much political prisoners they got. They don't ask you that. Other people ask you that. So I think it's a little disingenuous for the US after Mr. Biden to say, you're dedicating yourself to stopping the Chinese from doing certain things. And when we now ask you, okay, well, if you don't want the Chinese to do it, You want to build the airport for it? You want to build a bridge over the Harbour Bridge? The U.S. Development Assistance is not geared like that. In addition to it, the gentleman has said he's reducing the amount of development assistance he's giving. So I think there's space for both the U.S. and the Chinese to operate. Again, Brazil, is a powerful country in the hemisphere, and through like the BRICS, the other non-traditional partners. Let's make the space. And you can say to Mr. Rubio and company that is a little, unfair or unethical or whatever, to not want us to go, as we say, in Thai bundle with the Chinese, but in the same breath, they're not picking up the slack. That I don't think works well. And let's be fair, no one of these countries is an island, because America needs other countries to trade and buy its goods, as the gentleman is seeing with the tariffs. Right? The thing works both ways. You might have a trade surplus in one direction, but America can't consume all the goods that it produces. And America can't produce all the goods it produces without inputs from second and third countries. So let's find the space.
Also, recently I've seen the US removing itself from institutions of the United Nations, which are critical for us. For example, the climate change.
Yep.
The climate change, the UN, CCC, Committee on Climate Change. They've moved away. They say they're not participating anymore. That's a critical institution for countries of this region that are suffering from hurricane, the rising sea level. And they say, you look how there may be other countries that will pick up that slack and support us. Should we walk away from it? They remove themselves from UNECLA, which is the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, which at least used to shape some developmental issues and support for small states. The US and the Philippines. So what does a region do? Does hope for the best? Does someone say, well, by the over? You have to look, to my mind, to diversify those linkages. To ensure that some of it, some of the support is maintained.
I want to swing in another direction because I think our viewers would be interested in this. Mr. Trump met the Republican Party and warned them that if the Republican Party loses the midterms, he may be impeached. There seems to be perhaps more expressed in the United States and many other democratic countries, a bitterness in the divide. And I could see the Democratic Party so bitter, so badly bruised by what is going on, that in a midterm victory, they could impeach Mr. Trump. Is there some hope in another year that the world may go in a different direction because he may be gone?
No, I don't know. I don't know that it follows that if he's impeached, he's gone.
Well, he has to resign.
Huh?
He has to resign.
Well, I mean, others have been impeached in the past and they're going away.
No, but they didn't get the two houses to impeach them.
That's what I'm telling you. You got to get the votes. And I made the point.
But if they win the House of Representatives and the Senate,
well,
I know, Fred.
There's some Republican senators who are on their way out who don't need Mr. Trump's support, others that do. But as I was saying to you about the connection between foreign and domestic policy, there's a growth, almost every weekend for the past couple of weeks, there have been increasing rallies in major US cities against Mr. Trump's policy with ICE and how we should do it. You can't be tone deaf to that. The senators, the Republicans, they've been having town hall meetings, people have been criticizing them about tariffs, the farmers. There's a groundswell of opinion. And hopefully, as you say, if he wants to survive the midterms, and if some of the Republicans want to survive the midterms, they have to be alive to some of those considerations and say to the gentleman, listen to the people out there. You can't be tone deaf. You take any republic, any country, Nepal, the other day we saw it, Madagascar, you got to listen to the folks, unless you want to go
Bangladesh.
Huh?
Bangladesh.
Tanzania, all around the place. So what are you going to do? Just go in the streets and start killing people? It's the great United States of America.
But the question is, do you foresee impeachment if he loses, if the Democrats win the House and the Senate.
Who's the leader of the Democratic Party now?
For the
Democratic
House,
Party is rudderless.
for Senate,
The
is Schumer.
Democratic Party has not recovered since the election defeat. Ms. Harris has retreated. They hear and all kind of thing now. She should have go up. They should have put back Biden. They should have put other people. The Democratic Party right now doesn't have a leader.
How about the governor of California?
He's coming. He's now coming.
Yeah, he seemed to.
He's now coming. But that's for the president. Or some people say California might just declare independence.
But as a citizen of a small state, and we're looking for the kind of development trust that would support the quality of life of people of the planet and the region, I really would hope that there's a change in U.S. policy. I'm not saying that impeachment will bring betterment. I think we have to look to see the extent to which there could be some influence exerted on policy positions of the U.S. that would benefit this policy. Some people don't care. I mean, in U.S. Congress, but I believe that we have diasporic representation. We have people there who I think would get access to Congress for that may be able to influence some kind of policy change. Although that might be a pipe dream. For some, the argument is that the U.S. is set with hegemonic intent in the region. The download doctrines, is there. They want to control. But I believe that there's still space for some forms of intervention.
I think I said that in another piece earlier that if we could build some coalition, like partnership within the Congress, the Black Caucus and so on, I believe that the pressure actually might come not from, say, Russia or China or whatever, but from within, from his own people, some of them who voted for him, and say, this is not what we vote for. And come the midterm, or it might not be the impeachment, it might just be the threat of impeachment that would bring about the kind of shift that Mark is hoping for, we are all hoping for, so that you get an alignment between some of the noises that are being made internationally from small states who are complaining about visas or deportees or whatever, and you get another kind of pushback internally from people saying what ICE is doing is wrong, people human rights, the tariffs are causing them problems, Obamacare, housing costs, all of those things. When you got them two forces operating, if you tone deaf to that, and people say Mr. Trump is a survivor and whatever, if he wants to survive, he has to start listening to some of those noises. And so that would start some kind of shift, realignment, and if we build some alliances internally in the United, maybe now is the time for the diaspora to make their voices heard. You saw the Cuban and the Venezuelan diaspora was rejoicing 3 weekends ago in Miami when Mr. Maduro was kidnapped or whatever. But those people have a strong constituency. They are strong forces that are heard in the decision-making process in America. If we could get some of those decision makers to listen to some of those objections, it might be an opportunity for us to.
All right, let's close on this scenario. Suppose none of that happens, and United States become seriously and morbidly anti-democratic. Let's end on that note. How do you see the world?
We're going to go back to where we started. There is moral disorder,
The confusion.
It will be greater confusion, and I would hope that better sense will prevail, because we have so many theaters of war and conflict that impacts people, refugees, forced migrants who have been on the cards, that are displaced, that we have to hope that indeed you get some sense, I need to ask for words now. In relation to English, how we can get it together for you.
Lost for words in predicting the confusion?
No, I tell you it's confusion already, but you ask how we get past that.
Yeah.
Now, once again, I'm saying that I still see some sober heads across regime types. And I believe that a reformed United Nations, I'm still a believer in multilateralism and a rule-based system and respect for United Nations,
But let me ask you too, I mean, you are very profound, competent analyst recognized in the region in the end. And you must look at the trends. The trends look good.
Right?
The trends.
Trends.
No, they don't look good, but
You know,
You finish with that.
I'm saying they could be pushed back from those negative.
Well, the man, he must be biting the tongue. Francis Fukuyama, years ago,
Yeah, the end of history.
he wrote a book with the end of history.
Yeah.
History is done then, Fred. We got a new chapter now because he could never have predicted this.
Yeah,
race to the
the
bottom.
United States would have become.
And I tell you, and if that is the case, because he was saying, the Cold War is over, orders in place, rules, WTO, got United Nations, multilateral diplomacy. If you're correct, I guess we got to go and start learning Russian. Because if we go along on this trajectory, we might end up with NATO being destroyed, which is what Mr. Putin wants. In any event, a lot of European countries gravitated by necessity or choice to Russia, and then Russia is replacing the United States. Is that what you're telling me? That we got to stop talking? No, come on.
But it's not easy. It's not, easily predictable.
Yeah.
Because the level of uncertainty, and, even next door to us.
We let on that note. Thanks for being with us on this Friday evening, our viewers. We were coming to you from the living room of Dr. Mark Kirton, and he was discussing with his colleague in international relations, Neville Bissember, lecturer in international law at the University of Ghana, and one of Ghana's outstanding foreign service officer, full of experience in regional and global diplomacy. Have a very pleasant Friday evening, whatever is left of it, and enjoy the weekend coming. And let's hope good is coming. Thanks for being with us. Catch you later. Bye-bye.